numerous times, and he and Henry Morris differ on this. Henry Morris and John Morris take the more conservative stance and say, well, we're not really positive, we can't prove it, so let's just not mention it. Duane Gish says, look, I've been there, I'm convinced. So John Morris did not say, we don't believe they're legitimate, he just said we can't be positive, so he's erring on the side of caution. So it would not be correct for you to say, ICR has said they are not footprints. Don't say that. You can say they have withdrawn dogmatic support of this, but they have never said they're not human footprints, okay? And many of the people at ICR, Institute for Creation Research, still think they are indeed legitimate footprints. But my point is, it doesn't matter. We don't need to find dinosaur and human footprints together because dinosaurs have always lived with man. They were known as dragons throughout most of history. And there's probably a few still alive. In the Congo swamp, for instance, there have been many reports of dinosaurs still living in Likwala Swamp. Mr. Scotland, who was moving to Arkansas, by the way, he was in the bodybuilder contest, right next to me. William Gibbons is a good friend of mine. He and I wrote a book together called Claws, Jaws, and Dinosaurs. William Gibbons has been to the Congo swamp 3 times and once to Cameroon, where there are reports of dinosaurs still living. Ever since Congo was colonized by Belgium back in 1885, there were reports of dinosaurs still living in that swamp, small ones, 15 or 20 feet long. This article, 1910, New York Herald, talks about a dinosaur still living. 1948, Saturday Evening Post. 1980, a big game hunter went there back in the early 1900s and said he saw an animal that could only fit the description of a dinosaur. There could be dinosaurs, by Ivan T. Sanderson. Okay? Roy Mackle's been there 3 times. Then they report dinosaurs called Mokele Mbembe, small ones, still alive in the swamp right now. So I think there's a fairly good amount of evidence that there could be a few stragglers still around. Eugene Thomas, missionary, was there, a friend of mine. He's in Ohio now, retired. He was for 42 years in the swamp as a missionary. He said, oh yeah, I had 2 pygmies in my church that killed one and ate it. For sake of time here, since they're giving me the 1-minute warning, I'll just try a couple of other examples. We've got plenty here. 1925, this animal washed up on the beach in California. That's the head. Here's the mouth. Here's the eyeball. Here's the neck. I talked to the guy who wrote this book, Randall Reinstead. I said, Randall, can I get those pictures? He said, those are in the archives at Berkeley University. I went and checked out the pictures, wrote my book. I got so many articles about this saying, wow, write more on this. I went back to get the pictures, and they said, we don't have any pictures like that. And they have no record of them ever having had them. They disappeared. Who knows what happened? But the neck on this creature was 20 feet long. One atheist wrote me a letter and said, Hovind, you're so stupid. Don't you know that was a whale? I wrote back and said, just exactly where is the neck on a whale? The people who examined it, like Mr. Wallace, who was the president of the Natural History Society for British Columbia, he was there, stood there, examined the thing. Here's what he said. My examination of the monster was quite thorough. It had no teeth, its head is large, the neck 20 feet long, the body is weak, and the tail only 3 feet in length from the end of the backbone. With the bill like it possesses, it must have lived on herbage and undoubtedly inhabited a swamp. I would call it a type of Plesiosaurus. So I've done an enormous amount of research on dinosaurs that might still be alive. So I think the man and dinosaurs together to a creationist is not a problem. If there aren't any alive, it wouldn't bother me. But I think there's good evidence they have lived with man all through history. They were known as dragons through most of history. 1841, we changed names and now call them dinosaur. Thank you.
At the beginning of this debate, I made some statements about what I was going to do in my evolution class. I stand by those. They're the way I've always taught my course. I don't believe I have the power to brainwash my students into abandoning their faith. If I did have that power, well, what I would brainwash them into doing would be my stack of dirty dishes, which is more important than I get done than the other alternative. I used to ask questions like this, but for the past 3 years when I've taught evolution, I simply have not asked students whether they believe it or not. And the reason is that belief in the religious sense, the assuredness of things unseen and Paul's definition thereof, is simply not the issue in a science class. And I teach evolution in a science class. I do not particularly care whether they accept it or not. I've had people come up to me with the attitude that they seem to think that for every 10 people I convert to the cause of evolutionism, I get another piece of free luggage or something like that. Well, I don't. It does not make any difference to me. I have had students come in with very strong religious beliefs. They've shared them with me in some cases. Others have not. Some of them are theistic evolutionists. They're willing to accept evolution but believe God was guiding the entire process. It's not my place to tell them they're wrong, any more than it's my place to tell them that they can only baptize individuals as babies by sprinkling. That's not what I'm paid to make decisions about. I don't care if they believe it or not. They are free, if they wish to treat the entire class as an enormous fiction. What I do demand that they do is they understand the material. And I will stand by this. My students may or may not believe in evolution, but if they've listened, and if they've absorbed what I have to say, and if they understand the reasoning that I use, they understand it better than Dr. Hovind, and that's not very difficult. The fact that the statement you made that we never see stars formed is false. The Hubble telescope has caught them in various stages of formation. Changes of 3 nucleotides is fatal to the organism. In certain genes, perhaps it can be. There are other genes that can change in a great many ways without affecting organismal function at all. Mutation rates that have been observed in natural populations are much higher than that. Darwin was a racist. Well, find me somebody living in the 19th century in England who wasn't. And I will agree that Darwin's ideas and evolution in general have been put to a lot of racist uses. So has the Bible. If you want to ban evolution because it's been the inspiration for racism, would the next step be to ban the cross because it's been used as a symbol by those losers in bed sheets who go around setting it on fire? I don't think so. There is a difference between the way you use a theory, an idea, a principle, a religion, and what it actually says. And Darwin was not PC by modern standards. Nobody was PC by modern standards. If you cut all the racists out of history, you would pretty much have to get rid of just about all 18th and 19th century history and literature. He was ahead of his time in a number of ways, believing, for example, that passionately opposed to slavery. Stephen Jay Gould, whom you cited in support of your position, has written entire books on how evolution really does not support racism. What it supports is, as you said, the unity of humankind, that we are all of one family, we are all of one species, we are all descended from a common ancestor. That's Gould's position. That's the position of most. See here, some of the human evidence you mentioned, Nebraska Man and Piltdown Man, those are not seriously being taught as evidence for or against human evolution. And the reason is, science is constantly shifting. Science is constantly changing. All too often, science is taught as a set of facts that you just sort of memorize, spit back out on the paper, and then you're finished. Science is not that. Science is not the facts any more than a house is just a pile of bricks. Science is a constantly renewing process. We've seen some examples of this, about the Haeckel being brought up on court charges for falsifying certain of his drawings. What Kent didn't tell you was that later versions of the same drawings were considerably more accurate, and I say this because I've checked them against actual embryos. He talked about inaccuracy of radiometric dates, and I teach my students about these. There are plenty of things that can screw up a radiometric date. There are plenty of reasons you could get a wrong answer. There are also plenty of ways that we cross-check radiometric dates and can assess their accuracy, and when they don't seem to work, can find physical reasons why they don't operate. We can find physical reasons why they've gone wrong. If your clock or if your watch suddenly said it was 10:47 in the morning right now, you probably wouldn't conclude that our entire system of timekeeping is utterly flawed. You'd assume that something had gone wrong with your watch, something quite ordinary. The same thing, exactly, can take place in rocks. Well, exactly, except it doesn't involve gears and things like that. But the same processes can be affected, but we can tell when they have been. I teach my students that radiometric dating is not 100% accurate. I mention its fallacies, I mention its flaws, and I mention the ways that we can correct for this sort of thing. My last statement is this. Arkansas Bill 2548 was put out to eradicate inaccuracies, theories, suppositions, etc., and unproven ideas, religions, as Dr. Hovind says, from textbooks that are purchased with taxpayer money. Even a really good textbook is about 5 years behind the times, sometimes quite a bit more. Sometimes publishing companies don't update. Any textbook that you purchase, whether it deals with evolution or anything else, is going to have a certain number of oversimplifications and flaws and inaccuracies and things that we now know are wrong, sometimes because they're not written well, sometimes because they're just copying older versions, and sometimes because they haven't caught up with the new science. Dr. Hovind's presentations on human evolution have not caught up with the new science because I can think of about 6 or 7 new fossil forms that have been found that have some bearing on where humans came from. Even though he says that fossils provide no evidence for evolution, that's like saying gravestones provide no evidence for history. And so if you support this law, you might as well ban all textbooks right now. Because science is not merely a set of facts that you memorize and then get rid of. It's a constantly changing field. It's a constantly changing way of thinking, of coming up with reasonable approximations to the truth and then discarding them when they don't work and coming up with something else. And evolution, regardless of what Dr. Hovind says, is very much a part of that tradition. We are constantly revising. We are constantly updating. We are constantly tossing out bad and putting in better. We haven't absolutely proved it yet. We haven't absolutely proved anything. You will never prove anything absolutely anywhere in science. It was shown by the logician Karl Popper in the 1930s. You cannot get absolute proof. What you can get is, all right, you're putting up the stop sign, so let me see if I can finish this in an orderly fashion. What you can get are better approximations to the truth that is in fact out there. Evolution is very much a part of this growing process. Evolution is as sound a science as anything you are going to find. And while I don't demand that my students accept it, and I don't demand that they surrender their faith, my goal as a teacher is to give them a sense of this dynamic nature of how it changes and how it grows and how it improves. Thank you very much.
There we go. Well, I'm glad to hear that you admit science is constantly changing and improving and progressing. When you get all done climbing the mountain of truth, you will find the Baptists were sitting there all along. And you mentioned about improving the accuracy of the drawings. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. These are the drawings that Haeckel used to support the embryology idea. Okay? He flat lied. And it's not an improving of the drawings we need to get, folks. On top are Haeckel's drawings. Underneath are actual photographs. Now, if you try, it appeared to me like you tried to imply in your last statement that this might still be evidence for evolution because now we have more accurate drawings. I hope you're not implying that, because everybody that studies this will tell you it's been disproven a long time ago. The biogenetic law, as Haeckel called it, cannot be weeded out in spite of its having been demonstrated